Hi everyone. Welcome to Introduction to the Humanities. This is going to be the introductory lecture. I will show you what we need to do in terms of Canvas, how the modules work week to week, where to find things, all of it I'm going to go over now, and then give you a short lecture on an introduction to the humanities in case you don't know what the humanities are, and surprisingly not everybody does. So in my welcome page, this is on the home page. I'll read some of this here for you. Often the humanities focus on traditional perspectives and knowledge considered most important to understand the history of Western thought and culture. So this is a class that really revolves around what happens with the Greeks, with the ancient Romans, into the Middle Ages, into the Renaissance, into the Enlightenment, and then into the modern era, with an emphasis on the West. We do mention China, we do mention Japan, we do mention Persia and the Ottomans. There's a section on religions where we go over Islam a bit. And mostly, though, it is centered on the first topics that I talked about. We will have writing assignments and discussions, and the humanities has traditionally been over learning how to write rhetoric, how to write opinions, and also reading about things in human history culturally. History, philosophy, comparative religion, art, music, these are things that are kind of core elements in thinking about the humanities. And in the 20th century, we also add sociological elements, psychological elements as well. So it's kind of a catch-all of a lot of different subjects, and this is a introduction to kind of the broad spectrum of everything. We don't go deep into much everything, though you will if you read this textbook and read it in completely, not just to do the assignments. You will have a very good broad understanding of all those subjects that I talked about and be able to understand their context and to be able to understand historically where opera begins, what a Romanesque cathedral is, who Plato is. These are all real foundational bedrocks in a lot of other classes and a lot of other disciplines. I want us to read the textbook Landmarks in the Humanities, either the fourth or the fifth edition by Gloria K. Fierro. You can find them online. You can find them in the bookstore. It is important to have the textbook. You cannot do the class effectively on Google searches, Wikipedia searches, certainly having the AI write it for you. All of that will be inadequate. The equivalent would be trying to watch a movie and understand your very favorite movie from simply reading a summary of it on Wikipedia. You'll never understand the dialogue. You'll never understand the pacing. You'll never understand the shot selection. And our writer, Gloria K. Fierro, has not given us a textbook of just random facts, but in fact, things that fit together through the narrative of this course. And so if you're answering a question on who St. Augustine is, and you just start picking out random facts that you find on Wikipedia or Encyclopedia Britannica or whatever other source you find, those are going to not fit into the total narrative. So again, you won't have a clear understanding of the value of this specific text that I've chosen. And choosing to answer the question by trying to get AI or Wikipedia, other sources to do it, it is really easy to spot that you're not doing the reading. And the reading is the class. So make sure that you get the textbook. Now, depending on what kind of class this is, you could have a on-ground class with me. I teach this class at Saddleback College. I teach it at various high schools for Saddleback College. And I could be teaching this at another community college and doing a very similar class if it's an introductory class. If it's online, generally online, I will send you material announcements probably Saturday or Sunday before the class opens on Monday, and almost always we have something due every single Sunday. So by Sunday at 11:59 p.m., there's probably 1 or 2 assignments that will be due. Most of this is because we're generally in 16-week classes or 18-week classes, and this textbook has 15 chapters. The chapters are all between 30 and 40 pages, and there are a lot of pictures in it. So yes, you're going to find stuff that you have to read, but you're also going to find maps and pictures and all kinds of other stuff. And if you can get this textbook used for under $30 or under $50, you're basically getting a book probably under the cost of printing it. So it's a really good book. I think it's a fun book. It's not dry at all. It's the history of literature. There's a history of film. When does photography start? How does art progress through history? And how does it all relate to the historical movements, the religious movements, the scientific movements? It's putting everything together, and it does a really good job. And I want you to use it specifically. And if you don't, it is going to definitely affect your grade negatively. So don't try to hack the class. Understand that this is a class about enrichment. This is a class about understanding how human history has operated before AI, before Netflix and the internet. This is how storytelling begins. This is a very important way for you to understand where the world is, where we are today. And so many different themes in terms of how we view the world, how politics work in the world, how people have thought about themselves and metaphysics in relationship to how do we know what we know. All of this stuff is covered in this book and is a very good grounding for you for the rest of your academic career. I go by Hansen. My name's Michael Hansen in totality. I'm an artist and a writer. This is a video of me that was captured at a place called the Sunken City. I was going out at night on a fallen street, and I was dripping paint and brushing paint on big pieces of cement. Here I'm painting about a 12-foot tall archer, and I was creating graphic novels that you could read from one piece of cement to the other piece to the other piece. And I did this for several years. I made one novel that was 120 paintings, and I paint, I write, I research, and much of what I'm teaching is instrumental in my being able to write, being able to make art, and being able to contribute how I see the world in relationship to history and where we are now. And I'm writing a story about a ruined world that are on a bunch of ruins. And here you get a sense from this drone that accidentally just came upon me one day. I never expected this to have any video. So here's the street, as you can see here, as it's fallen at the Sunken City. This is an 8-foot painting. This is an 8-foot painting. Another one, another one, another one, another one, another one. And I'm standing here. And then there's another one here. So you would read this like a book, but you would read it while you were walking next to the fallen concrete. And to me, the whole way that I came up with this idea of painting this was by studying the Egyptians, by looking at Egyptian tombs and how Egyptian tombs are covered in hieroglyphs and are basically stories, but they're not on paper or even on papyrus in this case. They are on the architecture itself. And I think that that's a really interesting idea, and I really enjoyed doing that. So that's where I'm coming from in terms of who I am in relating to you, how I deal with art, how I deal with literature, how I deal with history. You can contact me through Canvas all the time. I have a tendency to be on the computer quite a bit, and I usually get back to you pretty quickly. So the modules, that's where you're going to find everything. Let me show you the modules. So when you go to the modules, you have an introduction to the course, an introduction to me, course policies that include things like what you're expected to do, what happens if you get caught cheating, and then I tell you how to get started, what's due for the first week, and then I have a syllabus that has the grading scale, and the grading scale is 90, 80, 70, 60. Generally, we're working on 5-point and 10-point assignments, and they slowly build up. And if you have one or two bad ones, it won't hurt your grade too bad. There are no midterm exams, no final exams. Everything is done with short answer essay writing about the chapters and various discussions and some videos that I will have you watch that will enhance some part of the chapter, either directly or something in contemporary terms that I can relate to the subject matter. So, depending on the class, what I have set up here is a summer class. The summer class is 8 weeks long. A winter or spring class is going to be 16 or 18 weeks. It's usually the same exact subject matter, it's just broken up into different chunks. So I have made video recordings of everything. If you hit on the video lectures, they'll take you to YouTube where you can find all of the lectures. And then I also have PDFs that I've made of everything. The PDFs you can download, and the PDFs all have links, live links to other videos, further reading on things, and the PDFs are not meant to be used instead of the textbook. You'll find that you won't be able to answer the questions on the assignments as well as you could if you do the textbook, and you'll give different facts and stuff that aren't in the textbook that will be a dead giveaway that you don't have a textbook. And again, I am grading you on the reading, on doing the reading, not just finding random facts. So you find, generally I'll have things like, when we do chapter 1, there's the lecture. And again, you can download and have the PDF after the class is over. You can keep it. I have supplemental lectures that go beyond the textbook or further into the textbook or something different than the textbook is giving us, just to give you more information. That's what the PDFs are all about. And also a chance for me to show you lectures online, have slides that have facts and have information, have images for you, and then I can also give you information directly from the textbook as well, from the video lectures. So in the video lectures, you're going to find that I will talk about what's in the PDFs. Then I will usually have discussions. You want to pay close attention to your Canvas because I'm doing this lecture in a summer class, so many of the optional lectures are required, or the optional discussions are required in the spring and the fall. But when I condense the class from 18 weeks to 8 weeks, there are some things that I made optional. When something is optional, it means you don't have to do it. It won't count against your grade. It will just be something else that you can add to your grade. It's different than extra credit. I am going to start you today in this lecture by talking about what the humanities are. And then one of the few quizzes in the class, there's a quiz about this short lecture. What are the humanities? Let me explain that for you, and then that will be the end of this lecture. The next lecture that I would give you would be on Chapter 1, the origins of the first civilizations from 25,000 BC to 330 BC. So what are the humanities? I'm going to describe it a number of different ways for you here. So the humanities can be described as the study of how people process and document the human experience. And then what you'll also find is that I'll normally give you images that are relating to points I want to make. And then also you have live links. Now, when you're watching the video, obviously you can't link to this. Although if you are watching the video, you can see where the URL is. Or generally what you can do is just look for what the subject is, put it into a search engine, and then go to videos, and you'll probably find either the same video or the same information. So this image here relating to the humanities is a painting in 1891 from a British artist named John William Waterhouse, and he is a pre-Raphaelite artist. They were artists who believed that painting had become too theatrical after Raphael, and they were interested not in the high Renaissance, but the early Renaissance. And they were looking for the exacting geometries. They were looking for a relationship to painting that becomes different when it becomes more about the spectacle and the theater of it. We are looking at an image from the Iliad, the Greek epic, that will be in our second chapter, one of the more important epic poems in history. It is something that, fortunately, we have fragments and evidence of for us to be able to know what the poem was. We could read it in its original language if we can read Greek, and certainly it has been translated into enough languages for us to read it as well. Two great stories from the poet Homer. Homer writes about the Trojan-Greek War in the Iliad, and then the return home, the Odyssey. The Iliad is important for understanding Greek gods, for understanding how the Greeks thought about war, but also how they thought about themselves as a collection of islands and different territories, small city-states. This is an image from the second of the epic poems, the Odyssey, the return home of Odysseus or Ulysses. One of the great heroes of the Iliad is trying to make his way home. He is trying to get back to his wife and back to his kingdom in Ithaca, and the gods are working against him. There are some working for him, some working against him, and it is a great travelogue of the entire Mediterranean. The story was so fantastic, it was often thought to be purely fiction until archaeologists began uncovering places like Troy in Turkey and realizing that this was an actual event that was written down a few hundred years later and had the properties that you might find in a Marvel Universe story, where in the Marvel Universe, you might have a city like New York, but that city has mythological properties of Thor and Captain America and stuff to it. So it's real, and you might be able to, 100 years from now, say, well, what are these cities in the United States, and have some idea how people dressed, what buildings look like, what certain cultures were, and then realize that the superheroes did not actually exist on the earth. Very similar to what we're looking at here. This particular image is Ulysses and the Sirens. The sirens are being depicted as women-headed birds with beautiful voices that draw men into their voices to get closer and then kill them when their boats get sunk by hitting jagged rocks. Here we're looking at something I think very human in Ulysses. Ulysses wants to survive, wants his men to survive, and has instructed them to cover their ears. You can see they all have what appears to be shirts or fabric wrapped around their heads so they can't hear the beautiful sounds. But Ulysses, he wants the best of both worlds. He wants to hear this beautiful music, and he also wants to survive. So he has instructed his men to tie him to the mast, and no matter what he says, to not unleash them until they have gone past the sirens. So this idea of wanting it all, wanting survival, wanting to do the right thing, but also wanting art, wanting music. You know, we all want to survive, but we also like to play as well, don't we? It'd be nice to be able to play video games and not work. It'd be nice just to make music and not work. But is a process of being human is what we're discussing when we're looking at the humanities. What in totality makes our human civilization and our human qualities? What should we know when we study it? So we use philosophy, literature, religion, art, music, history, and language to understand and record our world. And these modes of expression have become some of the subjects that fall under the humanities umbrella. So this gives us a chance to feel a connection to time and to history and to kind of put it all together and figure out, how did we get to where we are? Why do we have certain values? And how are people in the past really not that dissimilar from us in terms of the joy and the pain and the things that they feel as a living human being? This is a Greek statue called the Boxer. This was moved from the baths of Constantine in Rome. It is a Greek style, probably made by Greek artisans for the Romans, possibly. It is made out of bronze. It is about 8 foot tall if it stood up. And I have stood as close as my cursor is to this bronze when it was at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. And I saw the magnificent working of the body in this tin and copper alloy created 2,000 years ago. The human body looked like my human body. The knees were perfect. The elbow was perfect. As a former athlete, I recognize the athleticism, but I also recognize this is not a young athlete. This is an older athlete. And the athleticism is beginning to wane. As he looked up at me, his ivory eyes had been gone for probably millennia. So I was looking into the deep recesses of his head, and it was very powerful. He was looking up at me in pain. He had fought, maybe lost, with these old boxing gloves that he had on. And his face was swollen. Copper was put into it to show cuts in his face. His ears were swollen. And I could feel his pain, but I also could feel the dignity that he had as well. And it was an amazing connection that I had right next to the statue that, frankly, I don't have when I look at the picture here. It's very different to look at something virtually than to see a great work of art, especially a sculpture, in front of you and to stand next to it, and to somehow get a sense of the age and the history of it. That is really hard to explain to you. Why study the humanities? So why study philosophy, history, literature, and soft sciences like psychology and poli-science, rather than just math and physics and engineering? Are these luxuries that employment-minded students can ill afford, as the New York Times once said? In a report titled "The Heart of the Matter," it says, as we strive to create a more public discourse, a more adaptable and creative workforce, and a more secure nation, the humanities and social sciences are at the heart of the matter, the keeper of the republic, a source of national memory and civic vigor, cultural understanding and communication, individual fulfillment, and the ideas that we hold in common. They are critical to a democratic society and require our support. And the connection between our own government in Washington, D.C., and the National Mall in Washington, D.C., is very similar in many ways to the Roman Forum and how the central government and the government buildings worked in Rome as a central architecture, a central place where people worked and strove to make the best republic or the best country that they could make. This is an image from the book Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. If you're not familiar with it, I do have a kind of short video that explains it, but you may know it from seeing films or other ephemera. So, science versus the humanities. We live in a world increasingly dominated by science, but it is precisely because science is so powerful that we need the humanities now more than ever. In your science and mathematics and engineering classes, you're given facts, answers, knowledge, truth. This is how things are. They give you certainty about things. The humanities is about uncertainty, about doubt, about skepticism. The humanities are subversive. They undermine the claim of authorities, whether they're political, religious, or scientific. This skepticism is especially important when it comes to claims about humanity, about what we are, where we come from, and even who we should be. Science has replaced religion as our main source of answers to these questions. Science has told us a lot about ourselves, and we're learning more every day. But the humanities remind us that we have an enormous capacity for deluding ourselves. They also tell us that every single human is unique and different than every human, and each of us keeps changing in unpredictable ways. The societies that we live in also keep changing, in part because of science and technology. So in certain important ways, humans resist the kind of explanations that science gives us. So, the idea that the humanities gives you uncertainty, doubt, and skepticism. Mathematics, engineering, and science gives you answers. The humanities gives you questions. The humanities causes you to find questions about things that you know or think that you know. And when you write in the humanities, writing with absolute certainty is not wise. Always saying, if this, but, it could be this or, are certainly ways that make you look more in tune to writing in the humanities. And by the way, that's why AI and ChatGPT does a terrible job, because they always write with absolute hubris and certainty, and is a dead giveaway that it's not a well-educated person writing. This image here this is Jack Kerouac. He's an American writer. He wrote the book called On the Road. And On the Road was a really important book in the 1950s to understand what it was to be young in America post-World War II and an economic boom, and what sort of emptiness spiritually maybe was laying inside humans after trying to deal with post-World War II. Jack Kerouac is writing on a manual typewriter, and rather than putting in individual sheets of paper, he's using teletext type, long sheets of paper, so he can write continually. I found this wonderful piece of video here where he's on a television show. The show is called The Steve Allen Show. Steve Allen is a host of a variety show and an interview show. He is a jazz musician, and rather than just interviewing, he is interviewing while playing the piano. And I don't know of any other shows or podcasts that I have seen something like this. So in this particular clip, Jack Kerouac is reading a clip written in a poetic beat. So you get a sense of the writing here. You get a sense that he's writing like poetry. And again, if you just read a summary of On the Road, you don't understand how the words are coming at you. And hearing it in his own words is pretty amazing, with a poetic cadence. And in this case, it has improvised jazz playing at the same time. Let's listen to a little bit of this.
Well, a lot of people have asked me, why did I write that book or any book? All the stories I wrote were true, because I believed in what I saw. I was traveling west one time at the junction of the state line of Colorado, its arid western one, and the state line of poor Utah. I saw in the clouds, huge and massed above the fiery golden desert of Evenfall, the great image of God with forefinger pointed straight at me. through halos and rolls and gold folds that were like the existence of the gleaming spear in his right hand, which saith, come on, boy, go thou across the ground. Go moan for man. Go moan. Go groan. Go groan alone. Go roll your bones alone. Go thou and be little beneath my sight. Go thou and be minute as seed in a pod. Go thou, die hence. And of this world report you well and truly. Anyway, I wrote the book because we're all gonna die. In the loneliness of my life, my father dead, my brother dead, my mother far away, my sister and my wife far away. Nothing here but my own tragic hands that once were guarded by a world, a sweet attention, that now are left to guide and disappear their own way into the...
Pretty fantastic stuff, isn't it? Now, I can't always play a lot of these videos, especially when there's music, because YouTube might censor this. But again, you're getting an idea of what that book is and how he's writing. And On the Road is a defining work in post-war counterculture. It's before the 1960s and the hippie culture, a backdrop of jazz and poetry and drug use and young people trying to find themselves. And in this case, a young person traveling across America alone to find who they really are. What is it to be an American? You can't tell just by sitting in one city your whole life or one part of the country. You need to get out there and see things. So as I said, the humanities are more about questions and answers. The better you can ask questions, the better you are academically in terms of writing theses and writing papers. The questions that you pose that become the research that you find, that become the temporary answers that you pose in your papers, show you as a thinking, critical being. I want to talk about one other thing here. There's two other things I want to talk about. So this again is defining what the humanities are. And you are looking at the Pieta by Michelangelo. This is a marble sculpture from 1499 showing a very youthful Virgin Mary with her dead son. In fact, much younger than you would think a woman with a full-grown son would be. And we are feeling her generosity and acceptance that her son had to die for the rest of the world to survive, I guess. So this was written, that I'm about to read, from the National Foundations on the Art and the Humanities Act in 1965, and amended the U.S. Congressional Act that created the National Endowment for the Humanities. So this is how Congress writes about why the humanities should be funded by tax money. And, well, this describes what the humanities are. So the term humanities includes, but is not limited to, the study and interpretation of the following: language, both modern and classical, linguistics, literature, history, jurisprudence, which is a study of law, philosophy, archaeology, comparative religion, ethics, the history, criticism, and theory of the arts, and those aspects of social sciences which have humanistic content and employ humanistic methods, and the study and application of the humanities to the human environment with particular attention to reflecting our diverse heritage, tradition, and history, and to the relevance of the humanities in current conditions of national life. That is a really good way for you to kind of get an idea of what we're about to study. Now, where does all of this begin? The humanities begin as the humanitas. It is a word used by the Romans in Latin by a writer named Cicero to describe the formation of an ideal speaker. An ideal speaker who should be educated to possess a collection of virtues and character suitable for active life and public service. And these would include a fund of learning acquired from the study of good letters, classical literature, and poetry, and also be a source of continuing cultivation and pleasure in leisure and retirement, youth, old age, good and bad fortune. For Roman Cicero, Humanitas was a style of thought, not a formal doctrine. It inserted that man's importance as a cultivated being in control of their moral universe. A person who practices the Humanitas was confident in their worth, courteous to others, decent in social conduct, active in political life, was a human, moreover, who faced life with courageous skepticism, knowing that the consolations of popular religion are for more credulous beings than themselves, that life is uncertain and sturdy pessimism is superior to self-deceptive optimism. The rediscovery of Roman classical antiquity in the Renaissance by the humanists of the Italians, and Petrarch in particular, understood that grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, and moral philosophy makes up the humanities. And in the West, we can trace the study to the ancient Greeks as a basis of a broad education for citizens. For the Romans, the 7 liberal arts evolved into grammar, rhetoric, logic, along with arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. And then there's a major shift that occurs in the Renaissance in the 15th century, in the 1400s, when humanists are regarded and the subjects are regarded to study rather than practice, with a corresponding shift away from traditional fields into areas such as literature and history. In the 20th century, we have a new postmodernist movement, what it is to be human in the age of electronic media, where most of what you know about the world is from a screen, and also knowing how to be skeptical and pessimistic through the electronic media that is causing us to have lives that are lived virtually rather than in actual space. So in the 20th century, they're redefining the humanities to more egalitarian terms for a democratic society. So we are looking at new approaches and critical approaches. So for example, from the book Mythologies and the image on the left by Roland Barthes, Barthes is teaching us that mythologies are not Greek and Roman, but are modern mythologies. The mythology, say, of the Dallas Cowboys being America's team. Well, what is that? What does that mean? Well, they have a star on their helmet. Well, why is it America's team? Well, they're in Dallas, Texas. Well, what makes Dallas, Texas so American? Well, they have wide open spaces and they believe in personal freedoms and this and that, right? Like, there's this myth that has revolved or asserted itself that isn't actually true, and we consume that myth without always questioning it. So here in the Paris Match, Barthes says that there are denotations in society and then there are underneath connotations. And the connotations here, on the Paris Match, we're looking at an African boy from Algiers wearing a French beret and a military uniform, saluting the French flag. So we are denotatively getting a sense of Frenchness and militariness here. Underneath this, what's being said is, the colonies, this boy from Algeria, love being colonized so much that they will fight and die for the French flag. So notice that that probably isn't true. That probably the colonies did not want to be colonized, but the French are trying to make French citizens believe that the colonies are righteous, so they are showing people who have been colonized as wanting to be French and willing to die for France. That is a mythology. And again, a mythology that media is creating. And of course, we see that all the time today. Okay. So there is a short 5-question multiple choice quiz on what are the humanities, and that's how we will begin the class. I'll talk to you soon, and we will go over the first chapter, the origins of the first civilizations. See you soon.